So I'm joined now by Pádraig Naughton, who is the Executive Director of ADI, Arts and Disability Ireland, to have a chat about arts, access and inclusion in Ireland. So thank you, Pádraig, for doing this. It's great to have you on this episode. I think it's really important that you're on this episode, which I'm really excited for. We've got fantastic guests lined up. Pádraig, can you tell me a little bit about the work that you do in the real world with ADI, i.e. a non-COVID world?
Arts and Disability Ireland is a national development and what the Arts Council would call a resource organisation for arts and disability, and we work across the Republic of Ireland. There is a similar organisation in Northern Ireland called the University of the Atypical, based in Belfast. So what we do is we say that we champion the creativity of artists with disabilities and promote inclusive experiences for audiences with disabilities. And that we do in partnership with the arts sector. So what that looks like is we deliver a range of kind of services and activities and events. So we manage on behalf of the Arts Council Arts and Disability Connect, which is a funding scheme that's only open to individual artists with disabilities for training, mentoring, and the creation of new work. And that's an annual scheme that's now in its 7th year. We also manage and deliver a lot of the access services, particularly audio description and captioning for live theatre. Those are kind of two examples of the work that we do.
You spoke there about providing captioning and audio description and all that kind of stuff. And recently in Ireland, we've seen an increase in that in our theatres with plays like What I Don't Know About Autism and The Board Gosh. A lot of their runs now, they make sure and have an audio described and captioned performance. Do you think that we're on the right track? Do you think that there is an increased awareness and it's being received well? Or do you think we still have a long way to go in Ireland?
I still think we've a long way to go. I'm very pleased that, the Board Gosh have taken on audio description and captioning to the extent that they have, because their shows are very popular. They have very large houses. A lot of people get to see the shows. It's similar to the Abbey. And I do think they are a driver for the service, because when we talk to colleagues in other countries, like, for example, in New York, over the last decade, they're now beginning to see a lot more off-Broadway or shows that are coming to Broadway getting audio described and captioned, and a lot more interest from the audience, because a lot of the audience who haven't been to an audio described or captioned show before haven't probably been going to the theatre in a long time. I remember one of our board members in the past at Arts and Disability Ireland, when we did our first Romeo and Juliet, I think was our first captioned show at the Abbey. And she was telling me that 17 years prior to that, her Leaving Cert class had gone to see the show in the Abbey, but she hadn't gone because she was deaf. So that was her first time to actually see the show. It was accessible to her.
So incredibly important across the board for an awful lot of people.
The theatre and the arts in general is a social activity. We, unless we're seriously into a particular playwright or a particular director, and none of our friends are, we tend not to make the effort to go on our own. We tend to go with friends. We tend to go with family. It is a social activity. And therefore, I remember another show we did. It was a Theatre Love It show. A family of 5 went to see that show. Husband, wife, 3 children. they had brought their children to see the show because it was a children's show, being Theatre Love It.
Hmm.
But in fact, it was the father who was deaf, and he had never been to a show with his kids. Um, so these things are very important, but not just for necessarily for the people who maybe the show is targeted at, but
Mm.
actually for the group of people who go to see a show. It's very often count the deaf people or the blind people or the the hard of hearing people or the visually impaired people who go to a show and we know they are there. We also count the people they go with because it really gives you a better sense of what the benefit is.
Absolutely. I mean, theatre is inherently a shared experience,
Yeah.
and everybody should be allowed or be able to share that experience with their friends or family just like that. An awful lot of artists and audiences even have adapted to engaging in content online, and creating content online. What has your experience at ADI been with this?
Poor. To
Mm.
say from an access point of view, it's poor. From a flexibility point of view, if you don't have an issue with access, it's amazing because you can. I think suddenly uh, the arts has become more internationalized without travel, and I actually think there are huge benefits in that.
Of course, yeah.
However, having so I think there are opportunities arising for much broader conversations. However,
Hmm.
having said that, I have been really the extent to which access has evaporated quite literally out of the arts since it went digital. It
Yeah.
has more or less disappeared. It's very concerning. I was on a call recently with a group of museums and galleries from all over the place. And, I was kind of quite shocked to hear, and these are very well intentioned, very good people who really want to do the right. But the language has changed so utterly in that now we are and they were across the board, people groups that were described as being socially excluded or
Hmm.
disadvantaged are now all vulnerable groups. We're all vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I I can see around the language in 9, 10 weeks, uh, kind of almost a medicalization of
Yeah.
disability and
Yeah.
of need and of risk.
Mhm.
And uh, I think it's going to take a long time to go back. In fact, talking to some colleagues in the arts and disability world and disability world more broadly, um, people are saying that the social model in terms of language, the social model of disability may well have been taken back by a generation. And I kind of tend to believe that. I know people might say, well, when we have over 1,600 people have died, 25,000 people in Ireland have contracted the coronavirus, language couldn't be the most important thing. Uh, it seems a little bit shallow to be talking about it, but I actually think the type of language that has become part of everyday speech in the last 9 weeks will impact on how decisions are made about people's lives.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why it matters. It will also make a difference on why people decide to respond and what they can do.
Yeah.
Prior to this, we were having I was trying to articulate a very different conversation, which takes me back to one of your earlier questions, which was that notion of, are things improving around access? And yes, there's more
Mm.
access about. But one of the things I've been trying to activate a conversation around is there is public funding involved there, and therefore we have a ability that the arts is accessible to people. So I'm a great believer and would like to see more of the linking of the spending of public money or the receiving of
Mm-hmm.
public money being linked back to access, and actually that it be being that it is built into uh,
Mm-hmm.
funding applications and funding allocations rather than being an add-on. A once-off performance is always going to be expensive to caption, to audio describe,
Yeah.
to provide sign language for, but a repeat performance gets cheaper. But I do really believe that actually, if people receive uh, public money, then they have a responsibility to be accessible.
Yes, I completely agree with you there. And it's not an entirely off the wall idea when we've already got similar things in areas like housing, where contractors are obliged, if they're building a huge site of new homes, a percentage of those have to be given over to social housing. So there are, there's precedent. So it's not an entirely crazy idea. And I
Yeah.
completely agree with it. And I think it's something that I'd love to see as well going forward for
Mm.
sure. In saying all of that, your website is actually a great resource for the accessible online content that is out there. Now, a lot of it is, I've seen, is not Irish. There's a good few of the Irish galleries and museums that have tours and stuff, which is fabulous. There's also an audio described ballet from New Zealand, which is just gorgeous. But has it been easy for you to find that content, or have you had to really go digging to find it?
We've had to go digging. And the
Mm.
trawl has had to be all over the world, quite literally. I think that's concerning. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, in the next few weeks, you will see Arts and Disability Ireland announce, I'm hoping, a number of online workshops or webinars where we do some training around making work accessible. There are ways to make uh, audio description happen as well. So there are approaches that can be taken. There is an advocacy element to the way Arts and Disability Ireland work, but I also think it's really important to work with the sector to show them what to do, and
Mm-hmm.
so that they can do it for themselves. And actually, one of the
Yeah.
things that we have done in terms of putting in the effort to troll the internet to see what is accessible is to get some really good examples of practice, but also to see from the organizations that are popping up in our feeds what isn't accessible, and
Yeah.
then to kind of know this is where we need to fit in, this is where we could be most helpful.
You're right. It's a question of the tools and having the tools to do it and knowing how to do that. I'm very excited by the idea of ADI doing the webinars and training and all of that.
Mm.
That sounds great. Absolutely. Looking forward to when theatres and stuff are available, are allowed to reopen. And there's the possibility that there'll be further restrictions on audiences when they are allowed to reopen. I mean, is there a concern that this is going to further impede people with access requirements?
I think it will, and we're going to have to plan very carefully around that. Sighted guides can be very important in terms of being guided by an usher to your seat, to the bar,
Yeah.
etc. How is that going to work? Guide
Mm.
dogs, as NCBI have pointed out, have never been trained to socially distance. They probably could be trained to socially distance, but they
Mm.
haven't. So
Yeah.
therefore, they're to take their owner right to the front. They're going to crash on through, and that's just the way it works. There are
Yeah.
going to be issues. The other thing is we've moved very quickly to a visual notice, so a visual awareness of space, much more so than was the case pre-COVID-19. So, for example, markings on the floor, um,
Mm.
signs that tell people how to circulate, one-way systems, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, those are going to be quite hard for impaired and visually impaired people to navigate, and blind people not going to be able to navigate at all. There are a lot of people Ireland who don't identify as being disabled. They're very uncomfortable about it. Many of them acquire a disability as they get older. Deafness is actually one of those very significant in terms of numbers that people acquire, and they become expert lip readers. Now, if we start to mask up people, lip
Of
reading
course,
won't work.
yeah.
And in fact, you may suddenly find yourself with colleagues who are going, what? What? What?
Yeah.
And actually, they still won't say they're deaf, but actually, they won't be able to see a person's lips a um, through a mask. And so, our visor is going to be a better option in certain situations. There are very subtle issues like that people aren't really thinking about yet. In fact, it's one of the things I've been quite heartened about in the arts is I don't hear that many people uh, arguing against the public health measures. It's more how can we work with them and how can we be
Yeah.
viable with them. And actually,
Yeah.
I think that's in comparison to some other sectors. I think we've been very responsible in that regard.
I mean, you've brought up a
Yeah,
whole host of things there that need to be talked about. Certainly, I mean, with social distancing, are they going to insist that, it's one person at a time? As you said, that's not going to work if somebody needs to have an assistant with them or a guide dog, and all of those things that
yeah.
you've just spoken about. Absolutely. There's an awful lot to think about.
As an organisation, we are of 4 members of staff. We've continued to function, I would say, fairly seamlessly. At times, things are a little bit slower, but actually, it has people, we've been able to manage our funding schemes. People have got paid, which is very important, and artists have got their awards. Yes, I think the interaction and the real art happening in real spaces is really important, but that will come. I have no doubt about
Yeah.
that. But I do think certain things will be different. And I suppose the only thing I don't want to see being different is that we lose some of the gains that were gained in terms of access, and that in the digital world that we managed to get some of the access that we had in the real world into that digital world as well.
Fantastic. Pádraig, thank you so much for coming and speaking with me today. It's been absolutely fabulous, and hopefully down the road, once we're past all this, we might have an opportunity to do this in person, which would be lovely as well. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the sunshine today.
Yes, okay. Thanks very much.